So there are trilateral talks happening in Islamabad between Iran, the United States of America, and Pakistan. Pakistan, of course, being the host. There's a lot of expectations that the two-week ceasefire might convert into a permanent peace, but there are quite a few obstacles before we get to that stage. What can we expect, and is a lasting peace possible between America and Iran? I'm now joined by a very special guest. Mr. Ian Bremmer is the president of the Eurasia Group. Thank you very much for speaking with us here on Times Now. Let me start off by asking you, realistically, what are your expectations from these peace talks in Islamabad? Can we find a lasting and permanent peace at the end of these talks, or are the obstacles, the differences between the two sides far too much and far too many for them to be crossed?
The fact that they're happening is very meaningful. You definitely are happy to see direct engagement between the United States and Iran, facilitated by Pakistan. It is a reflection not of a change in Iran's position over the last few weeks. Their 10-point plan is pretty much consistent. It's more that President Trump has decided, after having started this war, that he wants an off-ramp. He wants a ceasefire. He wants a climb down. And because the decision to go into war was unilaterally his ability to take the Americans out, if he wants to do that, he can redefine the war aims. He can say, we've succeeded, we're done now. It may not be credible to a lot of people that are watching, but it nonetheless will dramatically reduce the costs and the consequences and the risks of ongoing escalation. So that reality is what's important here. The fact that Trump has changed his mind and now the Americans are prepared to engage, whether or not that leads to an ongoing ceasefire is really much more up to the Americans, and whether Trump is prepared to accept something that looks a lot more like the status quo ante. My final point here, I have no doubt that the Iranians are willing to engage in ongoing negotiations. They will talk with the United States in different formats for a long time. I don't believe that means they are serious about ending their entire nuclear enrichment program. I don't think they'll give that to the U.S. I don't think that they will end their ballistic missiles program in a verifiable way. I don't think they'll end all support for proxies across the region, even though they've been attacked and very badly damaged. And nor do I believe they'll give up on their influence in disrupting the Strait. So the question is Trump prepared to accept that? And if he is, then we won't be talking about this war for much, much longer.
So let's look at some of those conditions. How and why do you see Trump accepting Iran saying that, no, we're not going to stop enriching? How and why do you see Trump accepting that Iran says we're going to toll every ship that passes through the Strait of Hormuz? And, of course, the Lebanon question, which I don't even think is in Trump's control entirely. So on these three factors, how do you see these resolving for it to reach some kind of a permanent and lasting peace?
So those are obviously the right questions. I'll take them in turn. So first, in terms of the uranium enrichment, Trump has looked at all of the military options, and the ability of the United States to physically take and remove the hundreds of kilograms of enriched uranium at the Isfahan site is exceptionally dangerous and has been recommended strongly and repeatedly against by Trump's military command. So he doesn't have a good option to take it. That's the reason. And you've heard Trump say, and he of course, he said very many things which are quite inconsistent with each other. But on a couple of occasions, he's talked about not needing to do any more damage, that it's there, it's very hard to get at, it's effectively entombed under a lot of rubble, and that if the Iranians were to try to access it again, the Americans have satellite coverage, they could just blow them up. So Trump has given himself an off-ramp. Whether he's willing to accept it in a consistent way, we will see. Secondly, the larger question is on the influence of the Iranians over all the shipping that goes through the strait. And here we are 6 weeks into this war, and the only ships that are going through the strait are either Iranian vessels that the Americans have suspended sanctions on, or they're ships that are paying the Iranians for the privilege. That's it. And that's a very small percentage of the transit that used to happen through the strait before the war. Now, as of right now, Trump does not have a military plan that would allow him to reopen the strait. And so essentially, he's accepting reality by tolerating this. And you've heard him say, again, inconsistently, well, maybe it's good that Iran has control. We can develop a joint venture. You've also heard him say, completely unacceptable. We're going to blow them up if they don't do it. They don't open it up. Now, if you want to be skeptical about these talks, you can focus on the fact that there are thousands of additional American ground forces that are heading to the region. There's a third additional aircraft strike group with the carrier USS Bush heading to the region. They'll be there around April 16th. At that point, the Americans will have different options in the strait, including perhaps capturing Karg Island, where the Iranians have 90% of all of their oil exporting through. Now, that would not prevent the Iranians from using ballistic missiles and drones against the strait. But it would allow the Americans to say, we will take this oil, and if you don't allow the strait to open, we're not going to allow you to export any oil. It is certainly conceivable that Trump has decided he's going to give himself a free option for a couple of weeks, talking up the markets, talking down the price of oil, engaging in ceasefire talks that he has no intention of following through on once that military plan is in place. It is completely plausible he will have to make that decision. It's a very risky thing to do, of course.
So I want to come to, so that was the American side. The Iranians, even before they, started these talks in Islamabad, have laid out a couple of conditions. They want some form of compensation or reparations. They want unfreezing of a lot of Iranian assets. That, again, is a decision that's been left to the Trump administration. It runs into, I believe, over $100 billion. And they want a full ceasefire in Lebanon. And again, I'm not sure how much Trump has influence over that decision. That seems to be more driven by Israel and maybe Netanyahu. Are these conditions, can they be met for us to see that there is some meaningful progress or outcome at the end of these talks?
Well, remember, they initially said those were preconditions to have the talks. That was a lie. That was a bluff. They were trying to see what they could get. I mean, you don't blame them if you're in Iran's position. As my mom used to say, you don't ask, you don't get. So why not give it a shot, right? But it didn't happen, and they're still engaged in talks. So, I mean, their credibility on this is also open to scrutiny. It is hard for me to imagine that President Trump is going to unfreeze Iranian assets in a meaningful way after the consistent years of criticism that Trump and his supporters have laid at Obama's door for the pallets of cash that was Iranian cash that they unfroze in a much smaller amount. I think it was 1.4 billion or something like that once you included interest, than what the Iranians are talking about right now. Now, of course, Trump's ability to say, well, that was a horrible deal, this is a good deal. Why? Well, because that was Obama. He's not me. This is Trump. And so anything I do is obviously awesome. He's capable of doing that. Again, it's not credible. He'll still have support from most of the MAGA types in the United States. But this war is deeply unpopular in the United States. It's popular in Israel. It's deeply unpopular in the U.S. And he's going to get crushed in the midterm elections as a consequence of that. He has to be aware of that at this moment. You also asked about Lebanon. I do think that Trump has influence over what's happening in Lebanon. The question is whether he's willing to use it. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said different things domestically about Lebanon than he said to the Americans directly. He is now willing to engage in direct bilateral talks with the Lebanese government, not Hezbollah, but the Lebanese government in Beirut. Those talks are going to happen this week in Washington, D.C. And I have a reasonable expectation that there will be a ceasefire if the talks between the U.S. and Iran are still going on. In other words, if the Americans want it, I think that Israel would be willing to go ahead with that. They're going to want greater commitments from the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah, which they have committed to heretofore, but they haven't really executed on it. And they're also going to physically they're going to occupy some 5 to 7 kilometers of a buffer zone of Lebanese territory in the south. And they're going to do that to ensure that Israeli settlements, Israeli citizens in the north of the country will no longer be within the short-range missile fire of Hezbollah positions in the south. And much of the bombing that's occurred by the Israelis over the past hours, still going on right now, has been to facilitate that occupation. So to the extent that the Iranians are looking for the Lebanon to be a component of ongoing ceasefire talks, I think they're more likely to have some success there.
You did talk about how deeply unpopular this war is, and the MAGA base seems to be divided. Some of Trump's biggest supporters, certainly people who had a big role in popularizing him and maybe even bringing him to power the second term, Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly, they all seem to have soured on him, and he's lashed out against them as well. Repeatedly, the suspicion they've all now been publicly articulating is Netanyahu driving Trump into this forever unwinnable war? How much traction is that idea finding itself in the MAGA base? Because Trump came to office saying, I'm not going to do these forever wars. And lo and behold, here we are.
Well, first of all, let me correct the record. MAGA is still strongly, almost overwhelmingly supportive of Trump's war in Iran at this point. Almost all of the Republicans in the House and Senate have been supportive of Trump in this war at this point. It is true that you mentioned Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly. There are a few hyper online influencers with large followings that have opposed it. There have been a couple of Republicans as well, but they're notable for how small the number is. While again, independents have soured on it, non-MAGA Republicans oppose it, and of course, Democrats oppose everything Trump does. So that kind of goes without saying. Said, I don't want these wars, and the fact that this war is on him, I think is going to be seriously unpopular with those who aren't part of I will support Trump no matter what he does. In the same way that his flip on Epstein has proven very unpopular among most Americans, including many that voted for him but weren't hardcore MAGA. The affordability question is a really big problem for Trump going forward, and he's getting hit on that. This is very much related to it. And Trump, as president, has never had an economic downturn that he was responsible for. I mean, of course, he was president during the pandemic, but that wasn't his fault. This economic downturn with the higher inflation, the $4 gas, the $5 diesel, the coming food price increases, this is all solely on Trump. There is no one else for him to blame. Well, what about the Israeli prime minister? Yeah. The Israeli prime minister was pushing for this war. We've had great coverage of that, including that extraordinary piece by Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman in the New York Times last week. But this was Trump's decision. He was capable of saying no to Israel during the 12-day war, and then when it proved successful, he jumped in because he wanted some credit for it. This time around, he was far more confident because of the success in that 12-day war, because of his success in Venezuela, and because so many of his own advisors were unwilling to give him an unvarnished view of how badly they thought this war was going to go. Instead, they were telling him how brilliant he was, how successful he was. And so those are the reasons why Trump made this decision. It is certainly true that this war is popular in Israel. And the biggest beneficiary of this war politically has been the Israeli prime minister for his own personal legacy and his own personal ability to win yet another election when one is called. But I'm not sure that's so good for Israel in the long term, frankly. And I don't think that that is what decided the war for Trump.
You did mention the Epstein files, and clearly Trump was, feeling the heat of the Epstein files. A lot of his base did not like how he called it a hoax, and he just dismissed it. There was also all of this conspiracy theories around the fact that this war was started to deflect attention away from the Epstein files. And now, just in these last couple of days, you have the First Lady, Donald Trump's wife, talking about the Epstein files and saying that she has nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, when no one quite thought, or at least certainly was away from out of the news cycle. What is the relation, you reckon, between the Epstein files, how much coverage it had, the way the administration dealt with it, and now, over the last 6 weeks or so, obviously all news media and the American public have been consumed by the war. Why did Melania Trump do what she did?
The joke that's circulating around is that the Iran war has gone so badly for Trump that he now wants to release more of the Epstein files to distract from Iran. I don't, of course, think that's true at all. I think these two issues are unrelated. They're both problems. They're unrelated. It's very hard for us to have dueling headlines. It's one or the other, especially when these things are really large. And I think that the Iran war is still absolutely going to occupy the vast majority of attention because of the economic consequences that will be felt in the United States and globally, irrespective of whether the ceasefire talks continue and whether the ceasefire holds. Having said that, it was very unusual for Melania to make this announcement. I suspect that the reason she did it is because there is something substantial that is about to leak, that is about to drop, that she wants to get in front of, that there are going to be consequential and embarrassing revelations, that Melania felt like she needed to address and do it first as opposed to reacting to it. I don't have any knowledge of that, but I can't come up with another coherent reason why she would, in the middle of a day that no one was talking about Epstein particularly, decide that she would insert herself in that conversation.
So let me come back to the peace talks and the fact that it's being hosted in Pakistan. Obviously, here in India, a lot of people view Pakistan as a state sponsor of terror. There's been a history of, terrorists being sent from Pakistan to attack, civilians here in India, other targets here in India. So there are two questions that a lot of Indians are asking about: A, the credibility of Pakistan as a mediator, and B, whether or not it'll be successful at all because of the deep divide between the two warring parties, in this case, the United States and Iran.
Well, I think there's a reason why China is not taking the lead here, and they certainly could play a bigger role if they wanted to. They have been behind the scenes. They were publicly involved in the 5-point plan that the Chinese and the Pakistanis jointly announced a week ago, and that's because the Chinese don't actually expect this is going to be successful ultimately, and so they don't want to be attached to something that doesn't work. The upside for Pakistan is significantly greater. They're a much smaller country. Of course, they don't have a lot of experience doing this at a global level. They are in a fairly unique position. They now have a very strong defense relationship that's become increasingly public with Saudi Arabia. There is a nascent military and security quad alignment in the region with Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey that has played an increasingly important coordinating diplomatic role in their position on Iran and the broader Middle East security environment. Pakistan has developed a much more functional relationship with the U.S., with Trump, and with the Trump family directly, which has helped to facilitate that part of this conversation. And of course, they have a much more functional relationship with the Chinese for a long, long time now. Plus, they were engaged with Iran, and they were paying money to get some of their ships, their tankers, through the Strait successfully in that regard, just as the Indians were. So they're in a good position to actually facilitate this. That doesn't mean it will be successful, and I don't think that there will be any egg on face for Pakistan if they gave it the good Harvard try, as you say, and then, as Pinky Bhutto might have in the old days, and then didn't make it work.
So finally, at the end of this round of talks, or even at the end of the 2 weeks ceasefire that Trump announced, what are the odds-on chances that this war ends or it resumes all over again? Where would you put your money on as a geopolitical analyst?
I think that the ceasefire is more likely than not to stick for at least a while, because Trump wants it to and because the military is not in position. I think that irrespective of that, the knock-on disruptions for the Strait are going to be with us for quite some time. And longer term, the likelihood that this fighting breaks out yet again, either in the next few weeks because Trump has the military option and takes it, or in the medium term, because the Emiratis find that they're in an impossible position geopolitically, because the Israelis decide they're going to take another whack when they get the opportunity, or because the Iranians, with a decentralized military structure today, and they take individual decisions to execute on that. The Houthis aren't getting paid off anymore by the Saudis. They decide to hit somebody. But there's a lot of different actors here with interests in disrupting a peace, and that seems very plausible. If you add all of those things up, they're probably over 50% as we look in the coming months, let's say.
All right. Ian Bremmer from the Eurasia Group, thank you very much for joining us here on Times Now. Thank you.
My pleasure to see you.